You wouldn't believe this all started in a quiet little town in Oregon. A place where rolling hills kiss the horizon, where wind chimes dance gently against the windows each afternoon, and where people still nodded to each other from their front porches. But because my grandfather came to visit me for 2 weeks, this peaceful neighborhood turned into a battlefield. Fake SWAT teams, armed threats, and secrets darker than anything I could have imagined. I used to think being safe meant staying out of trouble, until I learned that sometimes trouble finds you even when you're just sipping tea with your grandfather on the porch. And when evil hides behind polite smiles and HOA policies, the first person to stand up might just be the one everyone overlooks. A quiet old man with a weathered coat, a scratched watch, and eyes that had seen far too much. My name is Emma Dawson, and I live in Willow Creek, a small town tucked away in Oregon, where autumn lingers longer than expected and people love order a little too much. I had just bought my first house after years working as a software engineer for a tech company up in Seattle. It was a cozy little place with gray shingles, white wooden window frames, and a lavender fence. I had planted myself full of hope and a longing for peace. And for a while, everything felt right, until Grandpa came to visit. Walter Dawson, my grandfather, 72 years old, lived in Southern California, where he always joked, "Even the sunrise looks tired down here." I had never questioned much about him. To me, he was just a quiet, slightly grumpy old man who preferred newspapers to screens, black coffee to oat lattes, and who muttered strange things like, "Too much order hides something." When he called to say he wanted to spend a couple of weeks with me, I was thrilled. It felt good to finally be the one taking care of him. I cleaned out the guest room, bought a new recliner for the porch, and brewed a fresh pot of tea for the day he arrived. He showed up with a silver suitcase, a wrinkled khaki jacket, and that half smile of his like he was just taking a detour, not planning a visit. "You're still growing lavender, huh?" he asked. "Still, and now it grows wild like weeds," I replied with a grin. The first few days were peaceful. He sat on the porch every morning with his newspaper while I headed off to work. Evenings we cooked together and talked about nothing in particular. But sometimes he'd ask me the strangest questions. "Have you ever looked at the HOA's annual budget? Does Silver Pines update its bylaws regularly?" I laughed. "You think they're laundering money through the recycling fees?" He didn't laugh. He just sipped his tea and stared out into the street. "You'd be surprised what hides behind things that look too clean." I brushed it off. I figured he was just being his usual paranoid self. What I didn't realize was that those questions weren't just musings. They were warnings from a man trained to spot corruption before it showed its face. It all began on a Friday morning, his 6th day here, when a woman walked up the pathway to my house. She wore sharp heels that clicked on the brick path like a judge's gavel and carried a leather folder like it was a weapon. Meredith Klein, president of the Silver Pines HOA. I had only heard whispers about her strict, cold, impossible to argue with. "Good morning, Emma," she said with a syrupy smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Morning, Mrs. Klein," I replied cautiously. She looked at my grandfather and then turned back to me. "I've noticed a guest staying for several days. As per our community policy, any visitor staying more than 5 days is required to register and pay a security maintenance fee. The current amount is $600. I blinked. "You mean my grandfather? He's family. He's just visiting." She nodded, then looked at him with thinly veiled disdain. "Not everyone is familiar with our rules, especially the elderly, but the HOA must maintain fairness for all residents, even if the guest is related." I could feel my jaw tighten. But before I could speak, my grandfather calmly folded his paper and asked, "Can you show me the specific regulation requiring family members to pay a fee for visiting?" Her lips pressed into a tight line. Then she replied, "Section 14, subsection D of the Residency Code. I can print it out if PDF files are difficult for you to read." That was it. The condescension in her voice made my blood boil. But Grandpa simply nodded, locked eyes with her, and said, "Thank you. I'll review it. And I don't have any trouble with PDFs." After she left, I turned to him, furious. "That woman is insane. I just wanted you to relax for a few weeks." He didn't respond right away. He looked out over the street like he was watching something only he could see. Then he said quietly, No one relaxes when their freedom is quietly sold through paperwork. I didn't know what he meant. Not yet. But that night, I noticed something different. He opened his suitcase again, and it didn't just hold clothes. There were folders, documents, a tablet with encrypted software, and a notebook with names and numbers I didn't recognize. And for the first time in my life, I realized my grandfather wasn't just a quiet old man. He was preparing for something. 2 days after Meredith Klein's first visit, she returned this time with a thick envelope in hand and a smugness that clung to her like expensive perfume. I was coming home from the grocery store when I saw her standing at my porch, tapping her pointy shoe on the brick steps like a judge awaiting sentencing. Grandpa sat in his usual spot, newspaper folded neatly on his lap, tea untouched. "Afternoon, Emma," she said with a practiced smile. "I've brought the necessary paperwork for Mr. Dawson to review. Given the non-compliance, the fee has now increased to $600 plus a daily $25 penalty." My hands tightened around the grocery bag. "He's not a tenant, Meredith. He's family. He's staying in the guest room for 2 weeks." She opened the folder dramatically. "We've had issues before with visitors overstaying and avoiding responsibility. The board voted unanimously to apply consistent enforcement. It's about community integrity." Then, turning to my grandfather, she said sweetly, "We understand that these things might seem confusing at your age. That's why we've broken down the process into simple steps. Sign here, initial here, payment options on page 3. We even offer installment plans for seniors on fixed incomes." Hair tone made me sick. I opened my mouth to protest, but Grandpa raised a calm hand. He took the folder slowly, pulled out the first document, and began reading with a level of focus that surprised me. Page after page, he flipped. His eyes narrowed slightly. "These documents reference legal provisions," he said after a moment. "Where are the original HOA bylaws and the municipal zoning statutes that support them?" Meredith's smile faltered just a bit. "Oh, those are internal, but trust me, they've been reviewed by our legal team." "And may I ask who your legal counsel is?" She shifted uncomfortably. "That's not really relevant at this point." "It is," Grandpa said, his voice still steady, but now carrying something else, a sharpness beneath the softness. "Because this form here implies legal authority it may not possess, and charging fees under false legal pretense is a federal matter." Meredith straightened her jacket, tone hardening. "We are a legally registered HOA, Mr. Dawson. I'm trying to help you avoid trouble." "Help?" Grandpa asked. "By threatening penalties for sitting on my granddaughter's porch?" She turned to me then, her voice suddenly urgent, as if trying to win me back. "Emma, your grandfather's refusal to cooperate puts your household in non-compliance. That affects your standing in the community. That affects property values." And there it was. The real threat, not just money, not just forms. She was aiming at my future, my stability, my place in this neighborhood. That night, I let it get to me. I confronted Grandpa in the kitchen, my voice tight, my nerves frayed. "Why can't you just play along? Just this once. Sign the damn paper and it's done. I don't want trouble." He turned from the sink, drying his hands slowly, and looked at me with eyes that held more sadness than anger. "Sweetheart," he said, "paying won't end this. It will encourage it." I swallowed hard. "You're making this worse." "No," he said gently. "Bullies escalate when you give them what they want. And HOA bullies with power? They become dangerous." He said it with such conviction that it shook me. I realized then he wasn't speaking hypothetically. He had seen this, lived it, fought it. The next morning, things got worse. Meredith returned again, this time accompanied by 2 HOA board members and a clipboard. They stood at the edge of my property line like building inspectors, looking for violations. "We're here to deliver the final notice," Meredith declared. "As of today, your account is $675 in arrears. If payment is not received by 6 p.m. tomorrow, enforcement procedures will be initiated." I stepped onto the porch. "What the hell does that mean? What enforcement?" Meredith didn't blink. "It means protective action to maintain community standards." She glanced pointedly at Grandpa's threadbare jacket and his old wristwatch, then said to me with chilling clarity, "This neighborhood has expectations, Emma. We can't just let anyone lower our standards." It felt like she wasn't even talking to me anymore. She was performing. For the board, for the neighborhood, for herself. As she turned to leave, I caught Grandpa watching them go, eyes narrowed, face unreadable. Later that evening, I overheard a conversation on the front lawn. Meredith didn't know I was inside near the window. She was speaking on the phone, pacing. Yes, elderly male. Possibly former government background. Doesn't match financial profile. Obstructive behavior escalating. Recommend additional resources for compliance. My stomach dropped. She wasn't just enforcing petty HOA rules. She was reporting him like a threat. I rushed outside, trembling, breath catching. Grandpa, we need to call someone. She's planning something. But he only nodded slowly, eyes full of grim focus. Good. Now we know she's not acting alone. Good, I almost shouted. They're coming after you. No, he said. They're coming after us, which means we need to be ready. He stood from his chair, walked calmly to his suitcase, and pulled out a phone I'd never seen before. A secure, military-grade device. He tapped a few buttons, then looked at me. I'm activating something I hoped I'd never need again, he said. But now we play by different rules. At that moment, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just my quiet, tea-sipping grandfather. This was someone trained, someone watching, someone ready. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew one thing for sure. We were no longer dealing with a homeowners association. We were dealing with a threat, and my grandfather was about to respond. The moment Grandpa pulled out that strange, matte black phone and tapped a code into it, I felt the atmosphere in our little house shift entirely. The warm, dusty corners of our home, the ones that had once held lavender candles and hanging plants, now felt like the backdrop for something bigger, something secret, something federal. He didn't say much that night, only, we're moving into the next phase, and returned to his notebook. The silence between us wasn't cold, just heavy with things I didn't yet understand. Every time I looked at him, I no longer saw a retired man. I saw a man who had walked through shadows for decades, now quietly preparing for one more descent. The next morning, the envelope arrived. No knock, no doorbell. Just a thick, cream-colored envelope slid under our door. Inside, a formal-looking notice from the Silver Pines Compliance Committee. No letterhead, no legal seal. Just bolded paragraphs written to intimidate. The new total? $750, with urgent enforcement protocol, to begin if payment wasn't received by 6 p.m. that same day. Underneath the fee summary, one chilling line stood out. Failure to comply will result in necessary intervention to preserve neighborhood security standards. I looked up from the paper, heart racing. Grandpa, they're escalating. He calmly took the letter from my hands, scanned it, and said, they're bluffing. But bluffing is a dangerous game when the other side doesn't know you've played it before. Then, for the first time since he arrived, he opened the silver suitcase completely. Inside weren't clothes or toiletries. There were encrypted hard drives, legal documents, bound dossiers, and what looked like a handheld scanner used for document verification. He placed a folder on the table labeled, Meredith Klein, background file. I leaned over. You've been investigating her? She flagged my radar the moment she weaponized policy, he said. Power in the hands of the petty always leads to exploitation. What I read in that file made my blood run cold. Meredith Klein had been the president of 3 different HOAs across 2 states over the last 10 years. Each community reported mysterious fee hikes, rising foreclosures, and an alarming number of elderly residents being forced to sell their homes under financial pressure. No criminal charges had ever been filed, but the patterns were unmistakable. She's been running a con, I whispered. Not just her, Grandpa said. There's infrastructure behind her. Shell companies, fake legal firms, complicit board members. He paused, then added, and this time, she targeted the wrong family. At exactly 4:30 p.m., Grandpa changed his clothes. It was the first time I'd ever seen him in anything but cardigans or plaid. He wore a pressed gray shirt, black slacks, and a field jacket that looked like it had seen some serious years. As he buttoned the collar, I couldn't help but ask, what are you doing? Stepping into character, he said. They wanted enforcement. I'll give them due process instead. He walked calmly across the street to the HOA office, a converted guest house Meredith used as her community leadership center. I watched through the blinds, heart pounding, as he knocked, then entered. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. And then the door swung open. Meredith stood outside, red-faced, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. She was pacing like a caged animal. The two board members from earlier looked rattled. Grandpa walked out behind them slowly, calmly, like a teacher leaving a very long parent-teacher conference. He came back inside, placed a USB stick on the table, and said, "She just made the biggest mistake of her career." "What happened in there?" "She tried to bluff me again," he said. "Told me her legal team would pursue me for defamation if I challenged her policies. And I asked for their names, their bar numbers, proof of representation." He smiled. "She had none." Then he slid a document toward me. It was a recorded conversation transcript, one he had captured with a pen recorder in his pocket. Meredith had admitted that the new fees were creative solutions, meant to ensure consistent cash flow from residents who don't push back. "She thinks she's invincible," I said. "She's wrong," Grandpa replied, "and now I have what I need." At 6:03 p.m., the so-called enforcement team arrived. A black SUV pulled up in front of our house, followed by another. 5 men stepped out dressed in what looked like tactical gear. No badges, no identifiers. Just black boots, mirrored sunglasses, and tight vests. One of them raised a megaphone. "This is a compliance enforcement order. Walter Dawson, step outside for immediate questioning." I froze. People were watching from their porches. Phones came out. Lights flicked on up and down the street. And Grandpa, he didn't blink. "These guys aren't law enforcement," he muttered. "Watch their formation. They're standing wrong." I was shaking. "They have guns." "No," he said, pointing. "They have airsoft rifles, painted to look real. Look closely, orange tips covered in black enamel. I've seen this tactic before." He stood up and walked to the door. I ran after him. "Grandpa." "No, what if they shoot?" He turned to me with a strange smile. "They won't. They're performers." And then he opened the door. The lead man barked, "Stay where you are." Grandpa raised his hands calmly. "Which law enforcement agency are you with? May I see your credentials?" Silence. He stepped forward again. "Do you have peace officer certification? What's your jurisdiction code?" The men exchanged nervous glances. One whispered to another, "We weren't briefed for this." Just then, Grandpa turned back toward the street and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "My name is Walter Dawson. I am a retired federal investigator. These men are impersonating law enforcement. Please begin filming." Neighbors raised their phones. Several people started calling 911. And then, like clockwork, real sirens echoed in the distance. Black sedans. Federal plates. The real FBI arrived. The look on Meredith's face, standing at the edge of the street, watching everything collapse, was something I will never forget. It wasn't just fear, it was disbelief. Like she had just realized the old man she mocked for his fixed income had been 10 steps ahead all along. As the imposters were cuffed and led away, Meredith screamed, "You can't do this. He's just a guest." But Grandpa calmly turned to her and said, "Thank you, Mrs. Klein. That's exactly what the FBI needed to hear." The night after the fake SWAT team was taken down, the neighborhood felt different. People who had once waved politely now lingered on their porches, whispering to each other about what they had seen. There was shock, yes, but also something else, a simmering anger toward Meredith Klein. Grandpa didn't bask in any victory. Instead, he was at our kitchen table, laptop open, typing at a speed I didn't think a 7-2-year-old's hands could manage. Beside him, a federal agent named Daniel Reese, who had arrived with the FBI team, was reviewing the evidence Grandpa had collected. "Emma," Grandpa said without looking up, "Meredith wasn't acting alone. She's just the local face of a larger operation." I frowned. "Larger operation? You mean other HOAs?" He nodded grimly. "Exactly. This wasn't about a $600 fee. It never was. It's a revenue stream, a scam, stretched across multiple communities. We're talking about millions siphoned from retirees, single parents, veterans, anyone who doesn't have the means or energy to fight back." Agent Reese added, "We've suspected a ring of fraudulent HOAs operating across the state, but we've never had enough evidence. Your grandfather's recordings give us a solid lead." I sat down, still stunned. So, Meredith's just a puppet? A dangerous puppet, Grandpa corrected. But yes, the real problem is the man pulling the strings. He turned his laptop screen toward me. A photo appeared. Vincent Blackwell, mid-42nd, with slick-back hair, an expensive suit, and cold eyes. Ex, financial consultant. 3 arrests for fraud, but he's slippery, always finding loopholes. He recruits people like Meredith, trains them to manipulate homeowners, and takes a cut of everything they steal. I felt my stomach twist. And how much have they stolen? Grandpa's voice was low, measured. At least $2.3 million in the past 3 years. From people who can't fight back. The anger in me flared. I thought of all the sweet elderly neighbors who waved at me during my evening walks. Mrs. Patel with her cane. Mr. Green with his little dog, and imagined them being harassed by Meredith's fake fees. So what happens now? I asked. We dig deeper, Grandpa said. We take them down. The next morning, Meredith was gone. Her house, which had always been immaculate and intimidating, looked abandoned. Curtains drawn, no car in the driveway. It was as if she had evaporated overnight. Vincent must have pulled her out, Grandpa said. He's cleaning up loose ends. Later that day, Agent Reese returned with an FBI team to search Meredith's office. What they found shocked me. Stacks of fake legal notices, all formatted to look official. Binders full of homeowner data, social security numbers, financial records, even photos of people's homes, and a ledger that made my blood run cold. Pages listing targeted elderly residents, with notes like press harder, offer payment plan, and, on one page, transfer property if default continues. They were planning to strip people of their homes, I whispered. Grandpa's jaw tightened. This isn't just fraud. This is predatory theft, Emma. It's organized crime. As we stood among the papers and chaos of Meredith's office, Agent Reese's phone rang. He answered. Then his face darkened. We've got a situation. Vincent's people know we're onto them. They're moving fast. That night, the tone shifted from investigation to survival. Grandpa began setting up layers of security around my house. He installed small cameras by the doors, reinforced the locks, and even showed me how to check if someone had tampered with my car. This is a war, he said, and we have to treat it like one. I tried to keep my voice steady. But why us? Why not just let the FBI handle it? He stopped, turned, and looked me straight in the eyes. Because I know how men like Vincent think. If they feel threatened, they'll go after the people closest to the threat. That means you. A chill ran down my spine. 2 days later, the war came to our doorstep. A black sedan parked across the street. Not the FBI this time. The windows were tinted, but I could feel eyes on us. Grandpa noticed too. He stood by the curtain, watching like a hawk. Wrong car, he murmured. Too clean, too quiet. That's not a neighbor's vehicle. We didn't call the police, not yet. Grandpa was waiting, as if collecting data. By the 3rd day, we saw them again. Same car, same spot. Sometimes a man in a suit would get out, pretending to check his phone while scanning the street. Vincent's watching us, Grandpa said, which means we're close to something he doesn't want found. That night, Agent Reese came over with a flash drive. We cracked Meredith's laptop, he said. You'll want to see this. We gathered around Grandpa's computer as Reese pulled up a series of files, spreadsheets, emails, encrypted transactions. The deeper we looked, the worse it got. Vincent's network wasn't limited to Silver Pines. There were 4 other HOAs all across Oregon and Northern California, each pulling the same scam. And it wasn't just fees. They had shell companies laundering the money into offshore accounts, bouncing funds through fake maintenance contracts and bogus insurance claims. This is bigger than we thought, Reese admitted. We're looking at a criminal network disguised as neighborhood associations. OA fees are just the bait. Grandpa's fingers hovered over the keyboard. The FBI will need months to untangle this legally, but we don't have months. People are still being bled dry. What are you thinking? I asked. He looked at me, and I saw the steel in his gaze. We bait them. We make Vincent move first. And when he does, we'll have him. I should have been terrified. But as Grandpa laid out his plan tracking financial flows, staging a fake compliance dispute to draw Vincent out, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just his granddaughter anymore. I was his partner. We stayed up past midnight, mapping out connections on a whiteboard, highlighting names, drawing lines between shell companies and bank accounts. I used my software skills to trace IP addresses tied to fraudulent invoices. Grandpa cross-referenced them with FBI case files he still had access to. At 2 a.m., we found it, a payment trail leading directly to Vincent's personal account. It was the smoking gun. "Got you," Grandpa whispered. But Vincent wasn't about to roll over. The next morning, a package arrived. No return address. Inside, a single photo of Grandpa sitting on the porch, taken from across the street, and a note that read, "Back off, old man, or she pays." My breath caught. They know about me. Grandpa's face didn't flinch, but his voice was colder than I'd ever heard. "They've crossed the line." He turned to Agent Reese. "Get me everything you have on Vincent. It's time to bring him into the open." By the end of that day, our quiet little house had become an operations hub. FBI agents came and went, setting up surveillance vans and monitoring the black sedan. I watched it all, my fear slowly morphing into resolve. "Emma," Grandpa said that night, "we're not just fighting for us, we're fighting for every family they've hurt." And for the first time, I believed him. By the end of that week, our quiet house in Willow Creek no longer felt like home. It felt like a command post. The FBI had installed encrypted lines. A mobile surveillance van idled 2 blocks away. The kitchen table, once the place where Grandpa and I played cards, was now cluttered with case files, open laptops, printed wire transfer receipts, and the occasional half-eaten sandwich. I hadn't slept a full night in days, but I was more awake than I'd ever been. Grandpa worked like a man on borrowed time. He barely ate, barely spoke, except when he was coordinating with Agent Reese, or asking me to track another IP, trace another bank route, dig deeper into metadata from the shell corporations. The photo with the threat note still sat on the edge of the table, untouched, as if to remind us both. This was no longer a theoretical fight. This was personal. And then Vincent struck back. It started small. My phone wouldn't unlock one morning. My 2-factor authentication had been reset. When I tried to access my email, I was locked out permanently. I turned to Grandpa. "They're in my accounts." He didn't say anything, just stood, crossed the room, opened his laptop, and ran a diagnostic on our network. Seconds later, his jaw tightened. "They're not just in, they're replicating access across everything." Within an hour, my credit score dropped 200 points. My car loan showed missed payments I never made. Someone filed a complaint with my employer, accusing me of federal overreach and ethics violations. I was suspended pending investigation. I stared at the HR email on my phone with trembling hands. "They're destroying my life." Grandpa didn't even look up. "That's what they do. Quiet warfare. No bullets, just ruin." Agent Reese came by that night with bad news. 4 other homeowners across 3 neighborhoods had reported similar attacks: false liens, identity theft, anonymous threats, all coordinated, precise, and timed down to the hour. "This isn't a reaction," Reese said grimly. "This is protocol. Vincent planned this." That's when Grandpa stood up and did something that would change everything. He pulled out an old flip phone, something ancient-looking, with chipped plastic and a worn keypad. He dialed a number I didn't recognize and spoke only 4 words. "It's time, phase echo." He hung up. Reese blinked. "Phase what?" "Echo," Grandpa said calmly. "Emergency counter, harassment operation. I designed it back in 2008 for field agents who had their families targeted." I looked at him in disbelief. "You had a plan for this?" He nodded. "You always plan for the worst. That way, when it shows up, you're ready." By midnight, things shifted again. The FBI installed a localized firewall around our home. We received new encrypted devices. A private security firm under federal contract was stationed nearby, not flashy, but trained. Grandpa assigned code words for every emergency: Hawk if surveillance was spotted, Ghost if someone went dark, and Cinder if we had to evacuate. I thought I'd be terrified, but instead I felt sharp. alert, determined. Because I wasn't just some victim anymore, I was fighting back. 3 days later, we found our leverage. I was combing through the metadata of an offshore transfer file when I noticed something strange, a line of embedded code that didn't match Vincent's usual signature. I decrypted it, layer by layer, until the full routing path appeared. And that's when I saw it. The money wasn't just being moved, it was being recycled. A loop of digital transactions disguised as infrastructure. Funding was feeding money back into U.S. political action committees, real estate firms, and even veteran charities. All of it untraceable until now. I turned to Grandpa, breath-catching. They're laundering it through nonprofits. He looked over the data, silent for a long time. Then, we're not dealing with just a fraud ring anymore. We're dealing with a financial intelligence operation, sophisticated, international, and someone's paying them to keep certain people poor and quiet. Agent Reese paled as he reviewed it. This is big, beyond HOA fraud. We're talking RICO-level charges, federal conspiracy statutes, but big truths bring big dangers. That night, our surveillance van was hit. The agents inside weren't injured, but the equipment was fried. Every drive, every wire, like someone had known exactly where to strike and how. A calling card was left behind, a single flash drive taped to the windshield. It contained a looping video of Vincent's face. "Mr. Dawson," he said, smiling, "this is your last warning. You can't win." And the girl? She's not ready for what's coming. Grandpa watched the video twice, then, without a word, crushed the drive beneath his heel. The next day, we went on offense. Our plan was simple: draw Vincent out. We leaked a fabricated report to the dark web, one suggesting we had already handed over our evidence to a congressional task force. We knew he'd try to intercept or shut it down. That was the bait. But the real trap was us. Emma Dawson, software engineer turned digital decoy. Walter Dawson, retired agent turned strategist. Agent Reese, acting as liaison, and a federal surveillance team running silent ops from a safe house 5 miles out. When the breach came, it was violent. 2 men attempted to access our house at 3:04 a.m. They were fast, professional, masked. But we were faster. The moment they stepped across the sensor grid Grandpa installed, the house went into lockdown. Shutters slammed, lights flared, and a silent alert pinged every law enforcement unit within 10 miles. By 3:11 a.m., they were surrounded. And when one of them broke, when he realized we weren't just civilians, but a fully armed federal sting, he said 3 words that changed the game entirely. "We work for Torres." Grandpa froze. "Maria Torres?" he asked. The man nodded. And suddenly, everything made sense. Vincent wasn't the top. He was a coordinator. But Maria? She was the architect. A woman known to few, feared by many. A former intelligence analyst turned rogue operator. The person who had taught Vincent everything. The person who had trained people like Meredith. And the person who, now, knew exactly who we were and that we were coming for her next. The name Maria Blackwell fell into the room like a thunderclap. Agent Reese stood frozen for a moment, visibly shaken. "You're sure that's who they said?" Grandpa's silence was all the confirmation we needed. I didn't know who Maria was, not really. But the look in Grandpa's eyes told me everything. He'd faced danger before. Real danger. But this was different. This was personal. "She's the one who taught Vincent," he said slowly. "Not just how to build fake HOAs, but how to weaponize systems people trust. Bureaucracy, community, safety. She's the mind behind it all," Reese added grimly. "We always suspected someone bigger, someone cleaner. Maria Blackwell fits. Former intelligence strategist. Disappeared 5 years ago. We assumed she'd gone underground." "She didn't disappear," Grandpa said. "She evolved." We spent the next 2 days buried in data, trying to piece together who Maria really was. What we found chilled me to the bone. Maria had once been a promising analyst with Homeland Security. Brilliant. Respected. A master at building strategic frameworks for national defense, especially cybercrime and domestic infrastructure vulnerabilities. But something happened. Something big. A whistleblower scandal buried deep. The official records were scrubbed. All we could find were fragments, redacted memos, and one chilling phrase repeated across multiple files. Pattern misalignment with mission ethics. She stopped believing in the system, Grandpa said quietly, and then she built her own. And it worked. Maria had created a network so sophisticated it mimicked legitimacy at every level. Real lawyers, real contracts, real fines buried among the fake ones. Her HOAs weren't scams. They were machines designed to harvest money, coerce obedience, and eliminate resistance through legal pressure or quiet destruction. She didn't just use the system, I whispered. She became the system. It wasn't long before we found her. Grandpa traced a shell company tied to one of Meredith's old properties registered under a subsidiary in Vermont. I followed the digital trail, a communications server bouncing between Toronto, Dublin, and finally landing at a private server farm in Aspen Ridge, Colorado. And that's where she was. Operating under the name Maribel Blake, Maria Blackwell had positioned herself as the president of a luxurious gated community HOA, home to former CEOs, retired judges, and even a few senators. Her operation was a fortress polished, professional, untouchable. This won't be like Vincent, Grandpa warned. She won't use scare tactics. She'll use logic, credibility, and charm. And if that fails, she'll disappear again. We're going after her? I asked. We have to, Agent Reese said. She's not just stealing money. She's setting the blueprint for financial abuse worldwide. If we don't stop her now, someone else will take her place. The plan was risky. Grandpa and I would pose as prospective buyers, relocating from Oregon. We'd be looking to invest in a second home, him as the cautious grandfather, me as the tech-savvy millennial helping navigate contracts. Our goal wasn't to get close to Maria. It was to get close to her system. If we could gain access to her internal network, we could extract enough evidence to dismantle her operation, maybe even expose connections to global laundering systems we'd only seen in fragments. But as we entered Aspen Ridge, I felt my throat tighten. This wasn't like Silver Pines. There were no threats, no manipulation, no smirking HOA reps twisting legal jargon. Here, everything was pristine. Landscape hedges, uniformed gate staff, residents smiling, waving. Nothing looked wrong, and that was the problem. We were greeted by Maria herself. She was nothing like I expected. Elegant, warm, a gentle voice, a knowing smile. She wore a cream suit and soft heels and introduced herself with perfect grace. Welcome to Aspen Ridge. I'm Maribel Blake, head of the Homeowners Association. It's such a pleasure to meet you both. If I hadn't known who she really was, I might have liked her. She looked at Grandpa and smiled kindly. You remind me of my father. He was very particular about where we lived too. He gave a polite nod. A stable neighborhood is the foundation of peace. She laughed softly. Exactly. And here, we pride ourselves on transparency and fairness. But behind that warmth, I saw something else. In her eyes, I saw recognition. She knew who we were. Back at the hotel that night, we debriefed with Reese. She saw right through us, I said. She's too smart for disguises. She won't run, Grandpa said. Not yet, she's curious. She wants to know how close we are. So what's our move? I asked. He looked at me, then to Reese. We feed her something tempting. The next day, we planted the bait. I accidentally mentioned during a HOA tour that I had experience in fintech, cybersecurity, and recently discovered strange fee structures in my Oregon HOA that matched recent federal warnings. Maria took the hook. By afternoon, she invited us to a private dinner at her home. It was surreal. The house was impeccable. Hardwood floors, tasteful art, walls lined with books about behavioral economics, policy manipulation, and risk mitigation. Dinner was polite, controlled. Then Maria leaned in, wine glass in hand, and said, Tell me, Emma, what do you think really happens when a community forgets who it's supposed to protect? The air changed. I met her gaze. They become predators, dressed as protectors. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. You're clever, but clever people often underestimate scale. Grandpa stepped in, calm and deliberate. Scale doesn't change ethics, Miss Blackwell, just the number of victims. That was the first moment her mask cracked. She placed her glass down and said softly, I know who you are, Mr. Dawson, and I respect your work. But the world has changed. Families don't matter to systems anymore. That's why I built one that does. You built a machine that destroys families, I snapped. She tilted her head. Number, I built one that chooses who deserves to keep theirs. And just like that, I understood. Maria Blackwell wasn't just a criminal. She was a believer. A warped visionary who saw herself as a necessary force in a broken world. As we left her house that night, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from something worse. Understanding. She thinks she's saving people, I whispered. No, Grandpa said. She thinks she's saving the system from people like us. And as the front gate closed behind us, I knew the final battle wouldn't be fought with bullets or threats. It would be fought with truth. And Maria Blackwell had just declared war. The night we left Maria Blackwell's house, something changed. It wasn't the kind of change you could see on the surface. The streets of Aspen Ridge still gleamed under neatly spaced lampposts. The hedges were still perfectly trimmed, but something deeper the illusion had cracked. I could feel it in the silence between Grandpa and me during the drive back to the hotel. In the way Agent Reese triple-checked the lock on our door. In the weight that settled on all our shoulders. We weren't just fighting a woman anymore. We were fighting an ideology, a belief system disguised as order. And to win, we had to expose it. Over the next 72 hours, everything happened fast. Using the evidence we had gathered, recordings, encrypted transfers, Shell Corporation maps, I compiled a full dossier on Maria Blackwell's operation. Grandpa reviewed it like a tactician preparing for battle. Every file, every timestamp, every offshore account was verified, then duplicated, then backed up in triplicate. This isn't just about proving fraud, he told me. It's about telling a story the public can't ignore. We knew what Maria feared most wasn't prison. It was exposure. Agent Reese coordinated with federal teams across 3 states. Simultaneous raids were prepped. Subpoenas were issued. Cybersecurity specialists launched a quiet infiltration into Maria's HOA servers. And at the center of it all, one final move. A public hearing. Grandpa insisted on it. She operates in the shadows, he said. So we drag her into the light. Cameras, witnesses, families. Let her see every life she's damaged. Let her feel it. I wasn't sure she would show, but she did. The hearing was held in a federal court building in Denver. The room was packed. Journalists, legal teams, elderly victims from across 4 states, families holding binders full of fake fees and foreclosure notices. And then Maria Blackwell walked in, poised, dignified, wearing a navy blue blazer-like armor. But her eyes, they flickered just for a moment when she saw Grandpa sitting across from her. And they stayed on me longer than I expected. Miss Dawson, she said calmly, you've done impressive work. Not just me, I replied. We did this together, a family. That word made her flinch. What followed was one of the most intense hours of my life. Grandpa gave his statement first, clear, measured, irrefutable. He spoke not just as a former FBI agent, but as a grandfather. A man who had watched his neighbors, friends, and fellow veterans get bled dry by people who wore HOA badges like weapons. Then I spoke. I talked about how it started with a $600 visitor fee, how it escalated, how it nearly destroyed my job, my finances, my sense of safety, how I found strength not in the system, but in the man who refused to let fear win. When Maria was asked to respond, she didn't deny the evidence. She didn't cry or beg. She simply looked up and said, everything I built was meant to restore discipline. If that's a crime, then yes, I'm guilty. There was no remorse, only conviction. But the room saw her now, not as a leader, not as a visionary, but as a tyrant in disguise. Within a week, formal charges were filed. Conspiracy to defraud, financial exploitation, racketeering, cyberstalking, obstruction of justice. Federal agents seized over $32 million in assets linked to Maria's network. 15 communities were freed from fraudulent control. 42 individuals were arrested. Dozens of homes were restored to their rightful owners. And a new task force was created by the Department of Justice, the Dawson Initiative, focused on protecting elderly homeowners from structural fraud. 6 months later, Grandpa officially retired, this time for real. He didn't have to chase ghosts anymore. He didn't have to watch over my shoulder. The war was over. But in some ways, The legacy was just beginning. We started receiving letters from people across the country. A widow in Florida who realized her HOA fees were suspicious and got her home back after confronting her board. A young man in Texas whose grandmother had been evicted unfairly, but now had legal grounds to sue for damages thanks to the Dawson Initiative. A teenage girl from Arizona who watched our story online and started a volunteer hotline for HOA victims. We hadn't just exposed a crime ring, we had started a movement. Our book, Never Underestimate Grandpa, became a quiet bestseller. Our documentary, The Hidden Fees, aired on PBS and was later picked up by international networks. I still remember sitting on the couch with Grandpa the night it premiered him in his old cardigan, me with a bowl of popcorn, both of us silent until the end credits rolled. When I asked him how he felt, he just said, proud and tired. But I saw the smile in his eyes. 2 years later, I was invited to speak at the FBI Academy. My topic? Family-based investigations and the ethics of civil systems. As I stood at the podium in Quantico, I looked out at the room full of future agents, young, eager, determined, and I told them the one thing Grandpa taught me that I'll never forget. Criminals don't always wear masks. Sometimes they wear community pins. They don't need to steal with guns when they can steal with fear. Your job isn't just to enforce the law. It's to protect the vulnerable, even when the threat comes from something that looks like order. Now, every year, on the anniversary of the first letter Meredith Klein slid under my door, I take a walk through Willow Creek. The neighborhood looks the same but feels different. There are flowers on every porch. A community center named after Grandpa now hosts free legal clinics for HOA education and homeowner rights. And in the middle of the park, there's a bench. Carved into the backrest, it reads, "For the quiet ones who refuse to stay silent, Walter Dawson." Grandpa passed away quietly at the age of 76. I was holding his hand. His last words? "Keep watching, Em. The world never runs out of bullies." And I promised him I would. Today, I run Dawson and Dawson Community Advocacy, a nonprofit that trains neighborhood watch leaders, educates communities on civil fraud, and fights for the forgotten. People sometimes ask me how it all started, and I always smile and say, it started with a porch, a newspaper, and a man who knew the cost of silence. Because legacy isn't measured in money or fame, it's measured in the lives we protect, and in the stories we pass on of one man who turned a $600 fee into a global reckoning. At its surface, this story might seem like an extraordinary tale of an elderly man and his granddaughter taking down a criminal HOA network. But beneath the layers of action, strategy, and suspense lies something more enduring, something deeply human. This is a story about family. Not just blood, but the unspoken trust that lives in shared silence. The kind of love that doesn't always express itself through words, but through quiet protection. Walter Dawson didn't just save his community, he saved the soul of what a family should mean. In an age of digital chaos and social disconnection, it's easy to forget that real strength often comes from the people who sit across the kitchen table from us, quietly watching, always ready. It's also a story about courage, not the loud, performative kind, but the type that stands calmly in front of fake SWAT teams and says, "Let me see your badge." In a world where bullies no longer wear black masks, but instead hide behind paperwork, regulations, or polished community rules, courage looks like asking one more question when you're told not to. It looks like refusing to sign something that feels wrong, even if it's easier to comply. It looks like protecting others even when your own safety is at risk. Perhaps most of all, this is a story about truth. Because lies can look official. They can wear badges. They can arrive in envelopes with legal language and signatures from people in power. But the truth? It survives. It resists. And when paired with persistence and moral clarity, it dismantles entire systems built on silence and fear. What Walter and Emma Dawson uncovered wasn't just fraud, it was an entire philosophy of exploitation. One that said people who don't fight back deserve to be taken from. That power belongs to those who manipulate better. That legal complexity is a tool for control. But what they proved is even more powerful. Systems don't have to be corrupt. Power doesn't have to be abusive. And families don't have to be victims. Their story reminds us that the fight for justice doesn't always take place in courtrooms or behind police lines. Sometimes it begins on a front porch, with a cup of tea and a newspaper. Sometimes it starts with a question no one else is brave enough to ask. So what can we take from this? Never underestimate the power of one voice. You don't need a title to make a difference. You need clarity, courage, and a reason. Ask questions even when it's uncomfortable. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. Truth begins with curiosity. Protect the vulnerable, especially those who are quietly suffering. The elderly, the isolated, the quiet families who comply out of fear, they need allies. Corruption hides in complacency. The more we normalize silence, the more room we give for abuse to grow. Don't wait until it hits your doorstep. Legacies are built in choices, not headlines. Walter Dawson didn't set out to become a legend. He just refused to let one bully win. That's all it takes sometimes. In the end, Never Underestimate Grandpa isn't just the title of a book, it's a challenge. It's a reminder to honor the wisdom and quiet strength, to recognize justice when it doesn't shout, and to understand that real heroes don't always wear badges. Some wear old jackets, carry silver suitcases, and teach us to never stop standing up for each other. That's the legacy. That's the message. And it belongs to all of us now.